hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.
Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of The Hybrid. I, as always, am Shawn Collins, and this is the show where we try to have cannabis policy meet pop culture, where we try to make sense of an industry that is equal parts promise and chaos. I'm here, as always, with our co-host, Erik Gundersen, coming to you from Maine, and the two of us have seen firsthand how legalization can work and how fast it can go sideways when the rules don't keep up with the market. And that's what we're going to talk about today, which is hemp. And before you picture rope and granola, let's be clear, this is the most consequential, and I would argue the most contentious piece of cannabis policy in at least the last decade. In 2018, Congress legalized hemp, and when they did that, they accidentally legalized an entirely new market and probably something more than they actually intended to. So the Farm Bill set hemp at the 0.3% THC. The goal was to jumpstart industrial farming, support agriculture, let CBD go mainstream perhaps. Noble enough. But here's the catch. It said Delta 9 THC. No mention of THCA, which you can convert once lit. No mention of Delta 8, Delta 10, HHC, and all the other things that have come along since. Which, of course, you can whip up from CBD with a little chemistry and maybe some hustle. So what happened? Exactly what you'd expect. Entrepreneurs spotted the loophole, drove straight through it, and today you can buy a 150 milligram gummy at a gas station in Kentucky that technically is legal under federal law, while a dispensary down the road in California is capping edibles at 10 milligrams and pays a 60% tax rate or something. So here's my perspective and what I think is the truth, which is THC is THC. Whether it comes from hemp or marijuana, if it's flower or lab conversion, it's the same compound. So building an entire regulatory system on artificial distinctions like plant origin or dry weight is absurd. It's like saying vodka's fine because whiskey is a felony. I'm sorry, vodka's fine, but whiskey is a felony because one comes from potatoes. Now, that doesn't mean hemp is the villain. Far from it. I think responsible hemp products like CBD oils, low-dose seltzers, and carefully tested formulations have done something pretty remarkable. They've lowered the barrier to entry for millions of Americans who would never set foot in a dispensary. They've expanded access, they've reduced the stigma, and they've also brought cannabinoids into everyday life. I think that's a win. But let's not kid ourselves. For every responsible brand, there's the fly-by-night operator cranking out high-dose edibles with cartoon labels, selling them online to kids with no age checks, no testing, no accountability. And that recklessness doesn't just put consumers at risk. I think it poisons the well for the entire industry. So we're at this inflection point. Congress is fighting over the Farm Bill. House Republicans are pushing for a total THC standard and banning semi-synthetics. Senate Democrats are cautious, worried about crushing hemp farmers. And in the meantime, states are improvising. Minnesota and Kentucky are trying to regulate. California, Colorado banned intoxicating hemp to protect their markets. Texas, there's a recent executive order. There was even news this week in Ohio. New York is capping total THC at 2 milligrams. They got sued. The whole thing's a patchwork. It's a mess. And right caught in the middle of it are consumers trying to figure it out. Is this safe? Is it legal? Will I get arrested? Ripped off? And right now the honest answer is, as all of us lawyers can attest, it depends. This is where our guest comes in. And it took me a while to get here, but Pam, we're really excited to have you. Pam Epstein is one of the most influential voices in all of cannabis policy. She's the chief legal and regulatory officer at Terpene Belt. She's led the California Cannabis Industry Association. She chaired the standards committees at ASTM, advised cities, weighed in on federal rulemaking, and really spent a decade in the trenches of cannabis and hemp law. She's seen this collision coming, and she's always argued for unity and for comprehensive regulation in a framework where the consumer safety comes first, where responsible players on both sides can actually thrive. So today we're going to figure out what went wrong in 2018. Can we close the loophole without gutting hemp agriculture? How do you regulate intoxicating hemp without choking off innovation? And is there really a path where hemp and cannabis can coexist under one fair, science-based framework? This isn't just a policy scuffle. It's about whether we can build a cannabinoid market that Americans can trust. And so right now, of course, the clock is ticking, so we're going to dive in. Erik, I didn't really give you much of an intro there, but we're talking about hemp today. How excited are you?
I mean, it feels like I'm always talking about hemp, which is
right.
Why Pam is a perfect guest for us today. And Pam, also glad to have you here. I met Pam, I think 3 years ago when I first left the state, met her at an event out in Las Vegas, and you could quickly tell how passionate she was around this, and advocate for like finding solutions. I always, and I still do think of myself as an adult use marijuana and medical marijuana guy. Like that's what we cut our teeth on. That's the lived life experience that both Shawn and I had, but it seemed like at my end of my tenure, and certainly the last 3 years consulting and working with states, this hemp conversation has monopolized the conversation. And really what I want to get to is like, I think we can recap, how did we get here? But it's really like, how do we fix the issue at hand? How do we get out of this conundrum that we're in? And I think it really starts with, if at all possible, having the hemp folks and the marijuana or the cannabis folks realize that they're on the same team.
That's right.
And I think, Pam, you can shine some light on what that dynamic actually is. What are like the hurdles or the roadblocks to getting there? Because I think it's going to take a group effort in order to come out on the other side with policies that make sense for everybody. So excited to have this conversation. Absolutely.
Yeah, you and I have talked about this for a while, just on our own, independently, and about, I think, some of the work that you've done with states and some of the work I'm seeing from the industry side. But one thing I think I want to build off of that you said, and I want to get Pam's take on this and welcome her in, is we cut our teeth as marijuana regulators on the adult use and medical side. I would argue that's who's having this conversation most right now, is marijuana regulators and policymakers around what do we do with this thing. And so as a result, I think, again, Pam, we could not be more excited to have you on, because this is something you've been talking about, I would say, longer than anybody, as far as like you've seen this coming and you've really been at the forefront of it in a state out in California originally. And obviously you've worked across the country, that like, this might be new to marijuana regulators. It's not new to you, that's for sure. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. But would love to get your take on, I guess, I don't even know how to zoom in on this. Like, how do you see the hemp world and the marijuana world colliding like we are today on this podcast?
I'd like to invite everybody to think of themselves as cannabinoid operators. That's first and foremost, I think, the headspace that both regulators and the industry need to align on, because quite honestly, it's how consumers see things, right? Consumers see THC and that's what they go for. So if we stop sort of isolating from our origin stories of like, were we in medical? Were we in adult use? We are all purveyors of cannabinoid, et cetera, cannabinoid products, cannabinoid policy, cannabinoid conversation. And so that's the first step in unity to me, is starting to talk more holistically about what we're doing and where we want to end up, right? I think one of the most pivotal points for me, I was in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, at the Constitution Center, and I was staring at that, broken up snake that Ben Franklin said, join or die. If it is good enough for the Constitutional Convention that became America's democracy, where you had disparate parties from all over the place, that same battle cry can work for us, right? It is a join or die moment. And that's what I would hope that people take away from everything that we talk about today as we get granular, is who are you? You are a solutioneer and an ambassador for better cannabinoid reform. Now, that being said, we have to get into the weeds about how all these things come together, but that would be my first.
That's right. Well, it sort of leads to my next question, though, which is I like the comparison, especially the historical reference to join or die. But if that's the rallying cry that we should all get behind, what are we rallying for? Right? Like if we're fighting for independence, and what is independence in this situation? Right? Because I think all these conversations I have, I keep hearing the same thing, which is, yeah, it's one plant. it's hemp, it's marijuana. To your point, depending on where your origin story is, that tends to be your loyalty for they should come my way versus I should go their way. But if we can rally behind join or die and THC is THC, what are we rallying for, do you think?
Well, I think it's independence. You hit the nail on the head. It's independence from the Controlled Substances Act. We do not belong there. And hemp really has an important catalyst in that story, right? I think everybody would agree that regulated marijuana systems are broken. They need to be fixed. We need to understand what the laboratories of democracy have told us. And these laboratories are highlighting certain challenges that are coming up. And what hemp has done is seeded a more open market. That has also highlighted challenges and is a broken system. So if we really want to unshackle and unite the plant, then we need to meet in the we don't belong on the schedule bucket. Now, I'm going to say something that is slightly incendiary to others, but I've been the canary in the coal mine saying slightly incendiary things for a long time. So I actually think that when we say close the loophole, first, it's important to know why that's a loophole, because this idea that some in the space are rallying against, that the Farm Bill didn't, the Farm Bill intended to allow THC products and the word salad of all derivatives everywhere, is untrue. Because if you go back and listen, and I would invite people to do that, listen to the arguments when this issue was happening on the Hill, and you listen to Chuck Grassley and Mitch McConnell talking, they actually have an entire conversation about this is not marijuana. So let's be very clear. Again, Shawn, to your point, if you're selling THC, you're selling THC. And so that's really what Grassley and McConnell were talking about. And they say, rope, not dope. That was the slogan that carried 2018. It wasn't rope and dope or rope in illusory dope. It was rope, not dope. So don't rewrite history. That's not what it was. And so
naturally derived rope.
Yeah.
Right. That's just, it just isn't what that was at the time. Also, people read the Farm Bill and they read that very initial small section about the word salad of what is hemp, all extracts, all derivatives on a 0.3% escalating weight function of one cannabinoid. And they forget that the FDA
that's the rallying cry.
Did have a directive. Their directive was to maintain compliance with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And hemp did that. When they went and did grass for hemp hulls and hemp hearts and hemp protein and hemp seed oil, that was them following the directive of what was in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill, for those of you who may not be familiar, is what's in the farm gate. It used to be the most innocuous bill in Congress. It was passed every 5 years without any problem at all. And now it's gumming up the works, not just because of hemp, but that's what happened. So why did we have this industry proliferate? People ask me that all the time. How did we get here? Well, we're a COVID baby. Intoxicating hemp is a COVID baby. Let's be honest about the situation, right? It happened in 2018. It started to escalate in 2019. It really hit a peak in 2020 when the FDA was, I don't know, potentially preoccupied with this little thing called a pandemic. So they maybe weren't paying as attention. I think the industry wasn't paying attention to a growing problem because they were in flux with cash, right? What if you ask any business person to look at the optics of what was happening of the arc of regulated marijuana, they're going to tell you that the COVID period was great. People were at home. They had discretionary income. So as hemp was coming in with a whisper, with this Delta 8 that nobody really knew, right? It was a cousin. It was Trojan horse CBD. It was all of these things. It was a confluence of a perfect storm that allowed this industry to gain traction. And through that, they did a really important thing. They normalized it. Great. People now are okay with cannabinoids. That's why the vernacular is so important. People are like, oh, marijuana, devil's lettuce. I don't know what's happening in Tennessee, but yet you have the most progressive cannabinoid program in the country in Tennessee that ultimately doesn't have a marijuana program.
Yeah.
it's nomenclature,
That's right.
right? Cognitive dissonance was happening. So back to like my incendiary point, what happened is you need to slingshot back to go forward. So in closing a loophole, you're going to do something really, really important. If you don't get zero, which should be every single person's battling cry, now there's going to be differentiation between where not zero is. Is it 1 milligram? Is it 0.25 milligrams? Is it 2.5 milligrams? Is it crazy people at 10 milligrams just out in the ether? I don't think so. But if you have Congress specifically, overtly say that you can have THC in a cannabinoid product that is outside of a state regulatory program, that gets you to unshackled freedom. Why? Because nothing else on Schedule 1 through 5 appears in conventional food or dietary supplements. So if we are going to close off a loophole, chart down a cast of regulation because the Congress doesn't say zero, that then makes every argument better, salient, reasonable. Why? Are we going to start allowing ketamine at bars? Are we going to start putting anabolic steroids in protein powder? I don't think so. Congress isn't going to want to undermine the entire
Baseball was
ethos.
better when that was happening.
Right? I mean, maybe. But they don't want to undermine the entire ethos of the Controlled Substances Act. So they're going to have to give cannabis what it deserves, taking the whole plant off the schedule and leaving on compounds. Because I'm sure we're going to get to the conversation around like what is a phytomaterial versus not. But that's my setup to like where I think we should go, because I think we do a lot of kill bill strategies or kill pieces of legislation, and we don't do enough solutioning. Taking off my pedestal.
It feels to me like everything's like a like everything's a crisis. Like there's always an urgent call to action that I'm seeing in my inbox like every other day. But I think sort of to pull it back to the marijuana side, and Erik, I'm curious your thoughts. Like, where were you the first time you heard Delta 8? Or where were you the first time you heard of Delta 10? Because I feel like as marijuana regulators, like there was a wave that we kind of experienced, saw coming, shared thoughts amongst each other, but it feels like until now, never really got our arms around. But Erik, I wonder your thoughts, because I think for me it was CanRa, and just hearing from some of the West Coast states around what they were seeing from hemp programs and what their hemp programs were becoming, which was a JV marijuana market.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I don't remember the first time I heard about Delta 8, but it's funny that Pam kind of called it how it came in with a whisper, because that's really what it felt like. You first heard about it. It was a West Coast thing. You slowly started to see it pop up in Maine, New England. And then the next thing you know, it's this huge issue and everybody's scrambling, trying to figure out what exactly to do. And it did come in quietly, but I also remember it feeling like it came in pretty quickly too. Which I know this isn't the answer that you were looking for, but I want to bring up a point here about one of the other challenges too. And I know most of the conversation we're having is going to be around what's happening at the federal level, the 2018 Farm Bill, like how do we close that loophole? But just like the sheer challenges. So just for the listeners to understand what these cannabis regulators at the state level were facing. I remember for some reason, I felt like I had to carry the mantle in the state of Maine because I was the marijuana guy and it didn't fall squarely in anybody else's bucket. So flagged it for our governor's office, was given the green light to start having conversations. But you know how difficult it is to have probably 5 different department heads, the AG's office, in-house counsel, all of these folks getting on the same page as far as what are we dealing with? How big is the scope? What is this? What are we going to be seeing? What is in our law now that would give us flexibility to address it in option A, B, or C? And being able to have those conversations on a consistent basis and getting consensus was nearly impossible.
Layer in too on that, like whose responsibility is it? Right? Like I think you bring all those agencies to the table, and it's not an issue that someone's looking forward to being like, I got this, or like, I want that. Instead, it's more like, it's almost like you're doing noses or something around the table, like, nope, not it. I don't want that one.
And you're damned if you're doing, you're damned if you don't. Because as the cannabis regulator, like enough people already hate you, and you're
Exactly.
like, if I felt like I needed to do it, somebody had to take ownership of it. And I knew, I was like, this is certainly an arena that I don't want to have to step into, but I'm going to, because I feel like I have to.
Yeah.
But
Well,
either way, you're like screwed.
You are, but I think, Pam, to your point earlier, like, we looked at the issue as we're sitting around that table, and this is like where your farm bill, like, what did they mean? Context is really valuable. Is we're saying hemp, and our agricultural folks are instantly like, that's a farm product, that's a crop, like, that's ours, and they were saying, yeah, it should be, but there's these products that are intoxicating, and that's our world, and that's because that's, to us, it's THC, it's marijuana, that's what we regulate. And then you had our alcohol folks being like, yeah, but it's showing up in beverages and liquor stores.
And
so
our licensees.
my guys are asking about it. And it's like, well, so now you've got ag, alcohol, marijuana sitting at a table. And from a regulatory perspective, I'm sure you've seen, though, those folks are also sitting at a table from a lobbying, policy, advocacy perspective nowadays. They're getting together, the hemp folks and the alcohol folks especially.
Well, it started off, I think, as like a hot potato problem, right? Like, this isn't my domain. It really was because of the farm gate issue, right? Like, let's break down what the Farm Bill really is supposed to cover, because I think that that's a big, it'll help people who are listening understand. So I like to use the example of garlic.
Yeah.
Right? So garlic in the field, garlic in bulbs, and garlic light processed into cloves is all under the domain of USDA. Now, these agencies, both federally and at the local level, start to work together. And the crossover pivot point is when you manufacture it, when you turn it into paste, powder, you mince it, any other form factor. That's no longer USDA. That's FDA. But there are these synergistic MOUs that happen both at the federal level and the state level. What you're identifying is that nobody knew, much to the point of this whole conversation, what hemp actually was, because we only had this large definition. And then we had this farm gate issue. Are you in? Are you out? And then we didn't have any downstream really regulation to capture that. And that became this stalemate as to, I don't want the issue. I want to take on the issue. I don't actually have authority over this. Is it a product? And the only thing that doesn't have a definition in the Farm Bill is the word hemp product. So what is it? Then you started to have businesses entrench themselves. And once you did that, then you get to your point around lobbying. But I do think it's a great moment to stop and say, once a day, I remind everybody, love your regulator. Like, this is a person whose job is really difficult, and they're trying to navigate all of these different stakeholder interests and opportunities and what you want to be doing with a difference without a distinction of the same product, when they, as well as every other AG, governor, are all trying to do best by the consumer. So then you have to flip into a conversation around, well, what am I trying to provide to a consumer, and how am I supposed to regulate that when I don't have any real clarity except concern from the arbiter of public health and safety, either DOJ or FDA? Then you have to take like a responsibility filter to what you're doing. And that's where I see the stalemate, right now. There's more conversation around, well, I was allowed to do something. I built a business on a house of cards, and now government at whatever level, you owe me a responsibility to exist. Let me be the one to uncomfortably remind everybody listening that the government doesn't give you a guaranteed business. They are adaptive to the current circumstances. Just because
Which amendment
you did
is that?
something. It's the secret one. It's
like
the
the First
overarching
Amendment right
one that
to
we, the people,
freedom of speech.
Yeah.
i.e. the people.
I don't think it's the second one. I know what the second one is. It'll come to me.
Right,
the
to
second
bear
amendment
arms.
is something. I forget. It's important.
Yeah,
That's the one. Yeah, okay.
it's
I know the
it's
21st
this
Amendment is beer.
illusory idea that the government can't change or recognize that there needs to be improvement.
That's right.
So
And
it's
I
an
mean
uncomfortable
that's so true.
reality.
I mean, I've seen it. Yeah, and I've seen it firsthand with the states that I work with as they start to get their arms around. All right, here's the approach that we're going to take. Here's the regulatory schema or structure that we're going to put in place, and they're all kind of standing there freaking out, saying, "I've been up and running and doing this for however long.
How dare you?
Yeah, how dare you?" And there, I mean, I hate to say this, but part of me is like sympathetic to it, but the other part isn't, because like, look, you were the one that decided to start the business in this arena. That's, you knew at some point this was coming.
Well, at some point it may not be your decision. And that's where I think the lobbying needs to turn into negotiating in some instances, which is like, you've existed with no rules. And this is where I think the spectrum of what states are doing right now kind of speaks to that negotiation, which was, if you are going to continue to be reckless, and we as government have an obligation to protect and promote public health, safety, welfare, if you are going to continue to put public health, safety, or welfare in jeopardy, then I need to remove you from the marketplace. And that is my basis, by the way, for doing that. Alternatively, if you can agree to certain standards, being lab testing, packaging, labeling, all the things that, the marijuana market has been doing and demonstrating compliance in, but also I think there is at least a minimum expectation around the things that the FDA looks for, which is quality, safety, standards, those sorts of things. Then we can talk about getting the junk off the shelves and allowing you to stay in a particular lane. That's the negotiation, though. But that's the middle, too, where I think they're going to meet, because obviously the other side starts their negotiations like, don't change anything, no rules. Like,
well, I will say you kind of said it, not like, okay, I think the three of us right now and the vast majority of listeners would be like, yeah, that's baseline stuff, like packaging and labeling and testing.
That's right.
But in so many instances, that is, sky is falling.
That is a fight
for these hemp folks.
Yep.
It's what you think is common sense or a first step is like non-negotiable, which can be very challenging. And Pam, I see you smiling. I don't know if you
there's a marijuana element to it too. And I hate to pick a scab, but like, that's like getting a medical program into seed-to-sale tracking. And so, sorry, I just wanted to see if Erik had like a triggered face. He does.
Yeah, no, but here's the exciting part of it is we can learn the mistakes that the original sins of some of these cannabis programs, which you didn't know at the time were sins, are things that can be corrected in a unifying program. So that's where, and it gets my gall when they're like, if I have to test my product, oh my God, my business is going to go under. People reformulate every day. Let's just take a minute and take your cannabis or hemp hat off and look what's happened over at CPG and into food companies. They're under attack. Now, cannabis companies should be paying cannabinoid businesses should be paying real attention to what's happening. The loss of color, the loss of preservatives, right? The attack on what it is that Americans genuinely know to as food. All of those issues are your issues. All of these label claim issues. I mean, my God, let's take a step back, both within hemp and cannabis. What you are putting on these packages, wait for the plaintiff's bar. You want to have some certainty and some standardization.
Seriously.
So take a minute to like understand the arena that we're going to operate in and understand that hemp is acting as an adulterated substance, while marijuana gets the benefit of being an adulterated substance, but under their own state regulatory regimes. I think the elephant in the room that people put blinders onto is, let's dig into food, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, and DSHEA, the dietary supplement pathway, right? So if we are saying, or those in the hemp space are saying, we are putting out conventional foods. And what is a conventional food? It is anything that you consume. It's a food or a drink. And a dietary supplement is something that you ingest. So I'm going to shelf the inhalable vape conversation, which is like a whole different dynamic.
Yeah, right.
But within this food context, ingestible context, The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Tax has a very expressed provision that says anything that is an approved drug or in an active ingredient in an approved drug or a clinical trial that is underway and public is not to be put into any of those foods that we just talked about, right? Because that would be then adulterated. There's a specific exemption that if that product was out in the market beforehand with safety, and we did go through that exercise with testimony with the FDA, and they determined that that was not the case for CBD. So all of these products currently that are not under a regulated marijuana or marijuana program, adult use or medical, actually violate the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So everybody really does need to get into the same boat to have new exceptions granted under those two master pieces of legislation that govern the food supply in this country. So it's not that you have an inalienable right to exist. You actually have issues, real issues about existing under current frameworks. And so that to me is the driver to say for regulatory bodies to say, hey, this should be something we need to delve into the details of, because we're actually violating federal law without the safety net that marijuana currently provides by being on the schedule. And so you're not a special unicorn that benefit, like cannabis, regulated marijuana, is a special unicorn that benefits from nothing but is or nothing but is subject to everything, right? And hemp's sort of this loosey-goosey thing. So there is a natural nexus point in order to save these products, because, and I don't want to be a fearmonger, but let's just put this into perspective. If tomorrow Secretary Kennedy or the president gives a directive to the FDA that says strengthen the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act or DSHEA, and I want all these intoxicating products gone, the FDA actually has that authority. With the loss of Chevron deference, they don't have the authority to create a new system to regulate these products. They need Congress, but they absolutely could start just showing up, and I didn't realize this, but the FDA actually has the might of DOJ and DEA, and when you're doing something of an adulterated manner, they can come in like they used to do the old school raids. Like that's not good for anybody. And so I think the reckoning.
I thought they sent letters.
They sent
they
warning
usually
letters.
Scold you.
But they've done that. So if the president or the secretary says take more action, they've already done the threshold action to put the industry quasi on notice. So like getting ahead of it.
I feel like they would just write a stronger worded letter.
I mean,
well, that would be incredible. Incredible. I don't know.
But they could also go a different direction.
That's right. But there again is where, what is the negotiation? What is the willingness to negotiate? What is the willingness to act like a mature industry that wants to be treated like a mature industry? Like those are all things that come along, like not so much like preference, but I think like respect begets respect. And so if there's this reckless mentality and the administration in any way feels like they must do something, we have to intervene, this is a problem because kids are getting access or someone's getting sick, there's hospitalizations, there's emergency room visits. And that's where I think you and I, Erik, coming through the sort of the marijuana space and having that being like the side door into hemp, because I think also people have a lot of different pathways into hemp. We were hearing about emergency room visits, and we're looking at our programs going, that didn't come from the legal marijuana market. That wasn't purchased in a licensed dispensary. That was purchased in a gas station. That was purchased in another state. It was purchased online. But we're taking the question from the media going, how could this happen? How could marijuana get into the hands of kids? Meanwhile, we're looking at it going, that's not our universal symbol. That's not tracked and metric, right? Like that's, I think, Erik, where you and I come from is we started to see this infiltration of a marketplace as sort of a threat to marijuana, but also I think as a risk to marijuana is probably the better way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I was surprised that at least the licensees up in Maine didn't react as fast as I thought they would for that exact point. Like this could, this seems like it could be nothing but trouble for like the integrity and like the consumer confidence that we're trying to build within this marketplace. Because Maine, much like all these other states, when we passed it at the ballot initiative, it was basically 50-50. So as you know, Shawn, you're not only juggling the thoughts, the feelings, and managing those things from the folks that are in that space, but also the folks that were against it. So,
you know, I used to say because I had a public commission that I worked under, and it was a 5-member commission. And I used to say to them, if you give me a 5-0 vote, like I've got work to do, and like I better put my head down and get it done. If you give me a 3-2 vote in favor of doing something, like I better be careful, because I've got sort of that balance where making 3 of my bosses happy can potentially piss off 2 of my bosses. And I would say the electorate's the same way. That's what you and I were juggling through expectations and credibility was, you know, Massachusetts was like a 53-46 split. And so I would keep reminding myself and my staff that, like, look, we've got 46% of the people that don't want us to exist for one reason or another, or aren't rooting for us to succeed here. So keep that in mind. We also owe them a degree of obligation to say, we see you, we hear you, what are you concerned about, and how do we prevent those things from happening? I guess I'm trying to figure out where the next question logically goes, but in that sense, I think. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think Erik hit on a salient point, like why didn't the industry show up? I think part of it was an interest in the proliferation of cannabinoid products getting out there. There is a benefit to that, to just more name recognition. And I think that for a while, cannabis was carrying the torch of these are all my issues, right? I need to educate on them. Massachusetts just released information that their uptick is due to intoxicating hemp products. Like there's a sophistication point that needed to happen, and things trail really difficultly. I mean, I think that that's one of the most challenging aspects is you're regulating from behind the 8 ball, right? You have to have the issue in order to understand what the issue really is. And to both of your points, like what's the negotiation? I'd like to move away from regulating through, and I'm sure you guys would both agree, regulating through litigation or executive order. And that's what this, let's use the right word, hot mess has gotten us, is that the states are so confused, the legislature, right? There's so much stakeholder input on all of these different sides that the confusion either leads to, I want to be regulated, but I don't like the way you regulated me, so I'm going to meet that with litigation. Or there's a stalemate and they keep not moving something forward, and you get these like wide swathing executive orders. One of the most interesting things, if you're a policy wonk, is to take a step back and look at the country and look at the strange bedfellows that this industry or this problem is generating, right? Like if we just look at who took the executive order pathway to get to legislation, you've got the strangest trio ever. You've got California and Newsom, you've got Abbott in Texas, and you got DeWine in Ohio.
That's your spectrum, by the way, in so many ways, like politically.
Yeah.
I agree that is not the way to govern. However, I think in some of these instances, like it's the only step they're able to take because of how complicated the issue is and how nobody knows anything. Everybody is confused, from the consumer up to the decision makers, the lawmakers. So Pam, when we first had that conversation about why are we not just regulating cannabinoids, I was like, oh my God, that makes a lot of sense. I lived the life of regulating 2 siloed cannabis marijuana programs. We had a siloed medical program and an adult use program. And from a policy perspective, it makes 0 sense. I mean, there are arguments for it. I suppose you can convince me at the point of retail. I've been bought and sold on that. Like there needs to be a different experience for patients and for consumers, but like we're talking about the same plants. And I literally had to sit in front of a legislative committee and explained that there was no difference between a medical marijuana plant and an adult use marijuana plant. And now you're bringing in the hemp plant, and I can just imagine all of their brains just melting.
Erik just brings in one plant and says, "This plant is hemp."
But it's so true. Like, and if
this plant is marijuana,
if that's the baseline, if that's the starting point, like getting through such a like complicated policy equation, getting an answer for it is going to be like a never-ending battle. So getting to the point of like, all right, we understand it. We know we need to take this first step. I can see that it being a catalyst for further legislative action. But on the other end of the spectrum, I think it would be important to talk about, and Pam, I would love to get your perspective on it, and Shawn, you as well. But like a lot of the problems that are stemming from this issue have to do with the fact that consumers have no clue either. Like they don't know what's hemp. They don't know what's cannabis. They don't know what a cannabinoid is. They don't understand there's differences. It's just like, they don't even know what they're taking. And we actually shared this story on an earlier podcast about my lovely aunt who was ordering this stuff to help her sleep through the mail. I was like, what are you doing? I was like, don't do that. She's like, what? You like, this is, you made this safe in Maine, didn't you? I was like, you have no clue. let me call Shawn. He'll get me some stuff. No.
Yeah.
But like,
I got a guy.
And to get to the point, and I don't mean to keep rambling on, but to get to your point, like, let's start regulating these cannabinoids makes total sense. And I'm sure the three of us can understand it and get behind that. But just from the sheer confusion across the entire spectrum of everybody that would need to be involved in to get to that, like, how do you do that? I mean, it starts with industry folks getting together and agreeing on some things, but like it's just such a tall hill to climb.
I think it's terminology. Look, you've got a favorable environment. If you were to stop randomly on the street, I think almost anywhere in the country, 5 people and say, hey, what do you think the status of marijuana is? Most of them, especially if they live in a state where they can walk into a store and buy something with THC, will tell you it's legal. Like we live in a really unique bubble as like cannabis or hemp, cannabinoid industry folks that understand there's gradation. But from the larger perspective, if you can walk into a store, go online and buy something, it's arguably legal, right? Like, why would you think that there's enough nuance? So that tells me that the education that's going to drive this comes from the consumer, because that's how we got here in the first place, right? Hemp exists because marijuana went into the trenches. I think, and one of my favorite analogies came to me by participating on a panel many, many moons ago, and it was pioneers take arrows and settlers take land. We have not settled yet. Everybody is a pioneer here, and everybody's taking arrows. Yeah. And we're acting as if this is a well-settled industry where we're just arguing over, competitive lanes. We're not. We need to galvanize those consumers who used to be patients and who are now wellness. Like, the array is so large. If anything, that Commonwealth project from the president talking about CBD should tell you that we need a different face, right? Unfortunately, disease is a hard thing. People run away from it. They don't want to be sick. They don't want people in their orbit to be sick. It's a little bit hard to craft the next iteration of a movement on that, or on a separate class of people, even though I think we all owe a great debt of gratitude to veterans over the years. They keep us safe. There's still an incendiary pathway, but everybody has pain and everybody ages, right? Like, those are just truisms of life. So if you start to cast these things in a way that is going to galvanize the consumer, and go back to the 2 basic principles of why cannabis exists: access and safety, safe access, right? That was the whole movement. And I think that needs to be a movement again. So that's the groundswelling of education. The other component of that is terminology. We need to stop with the like, I am hemp and I am a wellness product and that's cannabis.
That's right.
No, everybody can be a wellness product. You're a wellness product that contains cannabinoids. Let's get into the weeds of what is a cannabinoid, because they are not all equal. And that alphabet soup that's out there of just different cannabinoid combinations is dangerous. The reason why they exist is because they were tiptoeing around whether or not you could sell Delta 9, because that is the king of cannabinoids. That's the one that everybody really wants, right? So
is it CBG is the mother of all cannabinoids, right?
The mother liquor, or the mother liquor, the mother
Yeah,
cannabinoid. There's just so
I was
much.
gonna ask what's your favorite one?
What's my favorite one?
What's your favorite cannabinoid?
We should have a cannabinoid draft.
Right? Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's over 100 naturally occurring.
But that's like from the consumer standpoint, though. I think you raise a great point, which is that education and that familiarity, especially like if you stop people on the street. What's the status of marijuana? What's the status of? I think that just leave marijuana. I think if it's legal, they're going to say in their state it's perfectly legal, which is why I can buy it at a gas station, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I may not have to even go into a dispensary. Like that sort of like peace of mind that the average public, the general public has, that it's legal, therefore I can buy it. That's why I can buy it online, right? That's why I see ads on Instagram, right? Because it's legal now. And it's like, well, yes, it's technically legal, but what you saw on Instagram may or may not be legal depending on a local jurisdiction. And like I think that's where we lose the public, is make it make sense. Like why? And I always feel like I'm either answering a bar exam question or like it's just a struggle for me to explain. I can't make it make sense.
I start people with, look, what is it that you want to achieve? And then let's talk about safety. What do you want to consume? So the biggest thing that the industry can bring to the table from a solution perspective is to say, I want to start with THC, and THC that comes from the plant. And I think, Erik, in the prep for this, you'd asked a really great question. And even at the beginning, how do we assure the livelihood of agronomics, of true industrial hemp and agriculture? You unite this plant and you start talking about products that need regulation, and you uncouple it, you bring together, but you decouple the fact that when it's in the field, I don't treat wine grapes differently than I treat grapes.
Exactly.
If a kid
Hops
runs through
and
a field of weed, the only thing that will happen to them is they are potentially sticky, right? You put them in a bathtub full of flour, they put it in their mouth, it tastes gross, they spit it out. So it's a conversation and an education around how do we address the consumable products from the agronomics and allow true agriculture to be ag. We have 300 acres of hemp that we grow. I can't tell you how hard it is to actually be a hemp farmer. What other product in this country has a 30-day harvest window? Now, you have a right to repair your car without violating warranties and making sure everything is safe. You do not have a right to repair your farming equipment. You could have a $500,000 tractor that if you tinker with, you violate your warranty with John Deere. Meanwhile, I have a 30-day ticking clock. And if I don't harvest my product in 30 days and I have equipment failure, or I have labor shortage, or Mother Nature, who sits on my board of directors but answers to nobody but herself, decides that I'm going to have a weird rain during my harvest window, I can't walk up to a cannabis or a cannabis sativa L hemp plant and say, please stop making the little THC crystals that you want to make because you're in your prime and I have to harvest you. Otherwise, I have to destroy. Mind you, the government thinks I should destroy it by burning it in the field and like creating a THCA like disaster for miles.
Totally, yeah.
But that's what I am faced with. And not every farmer has a lawyer on staff. Why would they? So they look downstream and they see these high THCA products, and we apply the THCA, total THC principle in the field, and they have to destroy their product. This is who's being harmed. So when people talk about farmers and farmers suffering, that's the suffering, is they don't know what they don't know, and they're looking downstream. But everybody's stock, but like everybody's source material comes from there. So if we start to decouple and we allow infrastructure, like Levi's, for example, was going to have a whole line of hemp textile, but they didn't have a processor. And then they were worried about THC, right? So we are not ever going to allow that hemp industry to meet the potential that it was supposed to meet until we start siphoning off where these products are become consumable. And that's really the art of the negotiation is clarity and terminology. So like, no, you shouldn't just be a hemp product. You should be a hemp cannabinoid product and be proud of it. I want everybody to sell these products with an upfront, exciting, this is what I'm selling, and without subterfuge. So the sooner we can invest in standards and language and shared nomenclature, that's easier to go to the regulator with a package and say, hey, it's really important that I start to synergize these things. We don't have interstate commerce yet, but wouldn't it be great if everybody could have a hemp product and everybody could have a cannabis outlet and you could use a dual use facility downstream as long as you were using good GMP? We make food with peanuts in facilities with peanuts and we still sell them. Like it makes sense. And I wish that people
GMP piece has me paranoid long term for not just interstate commerce, but I think like import export, right? Like I think this is an issue that is not unique. I mean, it's unique to the United States in a legal sense, but from a production side, on the marijuana side especially, like where Europe is at, where Canada's at, like I think to your point of like people sort of going back to their corners a little bit, where like I'm hemp, I'm marijuana, and like never the two shall meet. Like I think long term that, and this sort of goes back to Erik's point too, of it's not a adult use plant or a medical use plant. I think to the same point, it's not hemp like rope, soap, or intoxicating beverage when it's a hemp plant. Like what it becomes ultimately is that product. Mm-hmm. And the same is true on the marijuana side, which is where Erik and I have had a good discussion before around, I think there is a difference at point of sale on medical as far as like dosing and sort of concentration, and more so like what should be an adult consumable product. But for me, that's like over the counter and prescription. And back to sort of hemp, I think hemp is like the third leg to that stool, which is like the future of what is this product going to be long term. I think hemp is in that conversation, needs to be in that conversation, because again, it's the same goddamn plant. So it's one input.
I wish that hemp wasn't scared of what economies of scale in other intoxicating products or even sugar and candy have learned. Consumers like to eat more of something while not feeling like they're overindulging. There is a reason why Bud Light is the king of beer. There's a reason why not heavy lagers are all out there. Why did that point, it used to be 0.5 go to 3? Like, why did we reduce that intoxicating or AVB of alcohol? We did that because consumers were over consuming. So don't be scared of reformulation. Don't be scared of low and slow. The consumer, if you have consumer stickiness, right? If that's what you're saying, because the argument I hear all the time is, well, the consumer won't buy it and I need to sell these products at this level. But at the same time, we're a replacement for alcohol and look at us. This is what's happening with traction. If you truly have consumer stickiness, if you believe in your product and your traction into that marketplace, then do what many, many companies have done before and embrace the power of the pivot and put out these products. If you're not putting out low dose products, then of course consumers aren't consuming low dose products. And let's be clear, I don't want to vilify hemp either. I think it's amazing. I don't like to drink that much. I am a cannabis consumer and I want to have a cannabis cocktail at the bar. I think that's the way of the future, but you can't lay people out. 10 milligrams is a lot. I couldn't have 3 drinks at the same pace that other people drink wine if they were 10 milligrams. Like, let's not do that. If you want to get into baseball stadiums and concerts and you want to be served where alcohol is served, then start understanding that people water down drinks at a bar. People make cocktails out of
That's right.
spirits. Like, this isn't.
There's a reason that margarita tastes so good. It's sugar. And
Right. Like
sweet
these are
and, right? Like that's
combined things. They're scared of it, and they should be embracing it and coming to the table with that as a solution, while making sure that cannabis can still sell higher dose, because as you bring these two things together, that's going to be everybody's continuum.
So I've heard you on, I've seen you on two panels, probably in the last year, and it's actually, I think one of them is definitely what was the genesis for this episode. But there were two things you mentioned in the last your last points there that I think I really want to try to make sure we drive home, and you've been really like very clear about, like, it sort of allowed me to see the world a little bit. One is that ABV for cannabis. And I think consumers understand that logic. It makes sense to me. I understand that the ABV for a Bud Light is much different than a bottle of Jack Daniels. So I understand based on that sort of scale, one is more potent than the other, therefore. And the other thing you mentioned I think, again, this is sort of the genesis for this episode, was 10 milligrams is not low dose. 10 milligrams for me is not low dose. 10 milligrams for you is not low dose. But 10 milligrams for some people that's called tolerance. And they get there eventually. So I think when we see these pitches across the country of like low dose edibles or low dose intoxicants, what is truly low dose? And I was just with someone last night who said to me, from a beverage standpoint, they'll drink 1 or 2 beers, a 2.5 milligram seltzer, intoxicant THC drink, and then maybe another beer. But their point was like, I'm drinking light. And I thought it sort of refreshed me for this conversation today. So again, it's sort of that, what is ABV when it comes to cannabis? And then what is low dose? And one, I think, has an answer, which is like, this is how to measure it. The second one, I think, is very different for a lot of people. So
I think one of the original sins we need to cure from, and I hope you both agree with me, from regulated marijuana, is not all manufactured products are the same. And so manufactured products regulation needs to be more bespoke than it's been in the past. So like topicals, edibles, beverages, even within those categories could use some differentiation. I'm always partial to TIC, or total intoxicating cannabinoid content. What is your TIC number? And starting to understand that we don't have every cannabinoid classified yet, but if we work under Delta 9, consumers have that same relationship with ABB. I'm always of the opinion, go low. The reasonable person, we're all lawyers, right? The reasonable person is oftentimes the dumbest person, like down 2 pegs from there. And that was what my law school professor used to say. Like, you need to regulate to that person. It's why we put hot coffee on coffee. You're not regulating to the connoisseur consumer. You're regulating to the new
because
consumer.
Of people like Erik, yeah.
And as hemp keeps reminding us that they serve this novice new consumer, then lower is better. Fight for higher packaging sizes. Be able to sell an 18 pack, right? But the actual serving size initially should be lower, and then don't tap how many that you can sell. And so I think it's that recognition of where we are at with the market, where we are at, the consumers are going to buy these products, right? One of the problems with cannabis is its origin story came about at the inflection point between going physically to a store and mandating that everything should be delivered to you. Now, right, Amazon used to be 2 days was prime. Now it's like delivered by 5 p.m. Just the world has shifted.
Yeah. We're here.
And so we need to be more adapted to that, to consumers. And my only other bone to pick, since I'm with the two of you, I'm going to do it anyway, is this idea, and I'd like to correct
Thanks, everybody.
the narrative. Then it's my last thing, because it's so important, that intoxication does not mean toxic. And impairment is a law enforcement metric, especially since we're talking about ABV. Please, I implore everybody to not create an impairment metric for law enforcement based off of the threshold that you or that some in hemp want to have. We don't use intoxication to mean toxic. We mean that it is a temporary issue with regard to your mental and cognition. So you can have an intoxicating substance and not be impaired. I really don't want to train law enforcement to believe that as soon as you ingest some of these products, you are innately impaired. So like, don't be afraid of the word intoxicating. It is okay. Sorry, I just had if we were talking about ABV.
No, it's a great, again, this is sort of one of those moments where it's like, yeah, that makes sense. Like there's logic there, but I don't know that I've ever really I've never given either word the weight or the significance that it carries legally, right? Like I think that's the important point you're making is we know these words, we think we know what they mean, but then it's like define it in a courtroom and it's like, oh shit, okay, I'm gonna Google that. So
I got a quick question. It's interesting because I've thought about this before too, Pam, and I agree with you, the low dosage stuff. I think it makes a lot of sense for all the reasons that you brought up and what we've been talking about. But I also like, if that customer base was out there, don't you think a business would see that and be like, all right, I can make money, and would have already done it? They haven't. Like, I wouldn't consider myself a cannabis user, but when I do, it's 2.5 milligrams because I don't like the feeling of being high.
But he does like the feeling, Pam, of being comfy cozy. So
I'm a big cozy. I got my blanket and my slippers on right now.
Nice.
See?
I really do.
Takes his gummy, does his cozies.
I like it.
Do my cozies. So is it
LL Bean probably too?
Is that customer? It is. Everything I'm wearing right now is LL Bean.
That's amazing.
Is that customer base?
They should sponsor this.
Is that? They absolutely should.
Squarespace.
Is that customer base there, or have they not come out of the woodwork yet because of stigma? Because they're sticking with their Bud Lights? Because I keep going back to the fact, if a business doing this work could make money, then they would do it.
They're not.
Why hasn't that shift happened yet?
They're not being serviced. I have to seek out these products. You have to seek out a 2.5 beverage. People will buy a beverage and cover it up or mix it at home with other things in order to meet their own need. So we're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy by saying we're only selling X product, that's our market, by only putting X products out there, and then allowing the consumer to manipulate them at home. And a lot of times, look, we are in the zeitgeist. We are in the bubble of everybody is acknowledging their cannabis consumption. There are a lot of still undercover cannabis consumers or hemp consumers, and they'll just adjust their products at home. And they'll put the lid on it and they'll be like, I'll drink half now and half later, or I'll have my beer in between and then I'll go back. So I don't think we're asking the right questions, and we're not questioning the data that we're getting, right? Same thing I would argue about, where is the source of your hemp coming from? Is it domestically grown? Is it mother liquor?
Yeah.
Is it converted? Like, we're not asking the right questions to get to the right information.
I think on that last point, we're starting to ask that question, but it's starting to come up more in an enforcement context than a,
right,
I guess, like a long-term policy philosophical context. Because at some point, true, there's going to be like this is American-made product, a future state. It's going to be this wine is from Napa Valley, this wine is from the south of France eventually. And I think that's ultimately, it's a good thing, except we as sort of U.S. market influencers in some way, I think, are obviously trying to make sure that our states and especially back to Erik and our experience, like our jurisdictions were well equipped for that pivot at some point, or at least prepared for, et cetera. But another point that you made, especially around like low dose, I wonder on the marijuana side if we're still doing market research when it comes to SKUs, because I think that's one thing. I just looked at metric data when I was back at the commission, and I was just like, how many products are in our market? And it was like mind-boggling the amount of SKUs that were in this space. So I think in some ways, it's still such an immature market that we're still figuring out who the consumer is, who that 80-20 consumer is versus I'm just trying it for the first time, and like, can I market to that person? Also, I can't market my products, so I'm really trying it out live on a shelf, because I can't I can't do a commercial. I can't do a. So I think that's where, to me, hemp is proving concept, which is they can market to some extent and people are gravitating to it. They're choosing beverages. But then I'll just share an anecdote. Talking to an actual beverage manufacturer, I said, like my wife and I we tried it. We loved it. And their answer was, yeah, I cut it usually. Like I mix it with seltzer. I'm thinking, then why don't you make a 2.5 milligram? If you're telling me to cut your 5 milligram product in half and you do that, why aren't you making a 2.5?
Because they're being told within their echo chamber that won't sell, right? And if the product won't move because there's a stigma attached to it or you won't make it, consumers, my favorite franchise, now we're getting into like my stuff, is Jurassic Park, right? Life will find a way. And it does. The consumer will find a way.
These sayings, right?
Just like if you don't regulate it, it becomes illicit and people get a hold of it. People are going to consume these products. That is the truth. That is the demand. The demand is there. So I think you can curate ways to meet it, and consumers will adjust. Steve Jobs used to say, I don't create products that the consumers want. I tell the consumer what product that they want. And that's why Apple is what it is, right? They put it out there and that's what he was going to make. That's what the best brands do. Don't be afraid to distinguish. To your point, we don't know who the king or the insert brand X that's a leading brand is going to be yet. So it's be in the conversation, join ASTM, like be a cannabinoid ambassador. Like the time is now, change is upon us. Hopefully it's good.
That's kind of a segue to what I was going to ask. I wanted to circle back to when we were talking about like how do we get out of this issue? How do we get everybody on the same wavelength? And you were saying we need to start changing our terminology and we need to start educating and we need to start setting standards. Pam, who other than you, who is doing that work and or who should be doing that work?
ASTM is a standards organizing body. It is a consensus-based organizing body. So more participants, better outcome. I would say everybody should have somebody that's there and driving it. It allows you to put forth a standard that's more benign for regulators to pick up so that it's not just your word is say so. And then I think it's important to try to have a united trade association, one that is willing to compromise, right? It is join or die. Like whether or not we can find a way to put beside the baggage, everybody has paid a different way to be here. It may not have been your way. It may have been different. Like understand that everybody's coming to this both because they want to put food on their table for their families. They want to make generational wealth. They want to have a business. Like that's not different for cannabis people than it is for hemp people, but maybe have a little, you said respect begets respect, Shawn. It really does. And this is respecting that every good operator deserves a chance to operate and really being more holistic, but join the conversation and don't join the conversation to be a naysayer. Don't look to kill a bill. Don't look to file lawsuits everywhere that you don't get your way. Look to have an engaged conversation and understand you have to give to get. And we're not going to move forward until we have some reckoning of the mistakes that have happened. And one of those is allowing an active, intoxicating, impairing, whatever word you want to ascribe to it, product into commerce that hasn't gone through the gauntlet of proof of concept to a safety standard, right? People are putting hemp, CBG, and CBN out there. Why didn't you do an NDI? Force the hand of the FDA. Say it's a new dietary ingredient. I gave you 75 days. Put them in nobody chose to do that, right? Nobody chose to do a GRAS for CBG and say it's non-intoxicating and it's not CBD or THC, which is drug excluded. Do the research. Like, it's so exciting, the research that's coming out. I mean, I went to the University of Arizona and I learned that in metastatic breast cancer in rats, they are demonstrating that we know opioids degrade your bone, right? Ultimately, people die and are in pain because the thing that we give them to treat the pain causes more pain. CBD upregulates the enzyme that creates bone density in your body. So co-administered, you are not suffering as much. And if you were allowed to add THC on top of that, maybe you wouldn't need the opioids, or you wouldn't need as much of the opioids. That is what everybody should be driving toward. Yes, profit, select, recreational use, but we are shortchanging ourselves and our friends and our family members of these really game-changing, life-changing medical advances because we can't play nice in the sandbox together. And that's really unacceptable. So hopefully people can take away that nobody's trying to vilify anybody, but there has to be room for negotiation and not like, well, I had to do it, you have to do it. Don't bring people into a broken system. Do something new. You're all innovative.
As people often accused of breaking that system, Erik, how does that make you feel?
It's adaptive.
I'm sorry, my children are going crazy upstairs. What was the question, Shawn? They apparently just came inside from doing something outside, and it is sheer chaos up there.
They want their LL Bean cladded father.
That's it. Yeah, they want to be comfy cozy too. There it is.
Love that so much.
Today's episode brought to you by the Bean Boot.
I'm telling you, we're going to get a sponsor, a non-cannabis cannabinoid sponsor.
Yeah, well, but that's to your point, and also like I'm in like the join or die rallying cry. Like I will follow you into whatever war or battle you're waging, just because there is like a crystal clear seeing this industry in all of its warts and all, I guess, right? Like, and then being able to articulate a future for it that is respects the fact that, to your point, people came from so many different backgrounds, but they're also going in so many different paths forward too, because there are folks that are really looking at each individual cannabinoid and thinking there is a medical, therapeutic, and or even curative in some way. We won't know opportunity here that I need to find out. Like I need to dig deeper on that. That person has like their future, their also their expertise will be well applied in this space. So too will the person who created a new flavor of beverage or a new packaging method for shelf stability around be it medicine and or consumer good. And I think that's where there is a space in the sandbox for all of those people, but also again like a path forward of like what does their future hold, and I don't need to hold them back to project or sort of slingshot myself forward, to use your previous analogy. So I think I really appreciate that you see that entire forest and again are applying your energy to try to recruit folks to behind the rallying cry of join or die. And I think the competitor was love your regulator, if I'm not mistaken. So
yes, love your regulator.
For love your regulator. Yeah.
Wear like a little shirt. We all have a common enemy, and it's the opposition, the anti-drug folks.
That's them though,
right?
I'm with us. They're them. I'm
with us too. That's common.
Right.
If you need to find common ground, there's a common opposition out there, and I like Madonna. I'm a descheduled girl that currently has to live in a rescheduled world. I'd like to invite everybody to the descheduled party because I think that it is possible if we're together.
Man. That is a good one.
I did that just for you guys.
I'm more of a
play some music.
I'm more of a like a prayer guy.
Like a prayer.
God,
okay.
That's such a good song.
Man.
Oh my God.
I'm gonna have so much fun editing this. Like the amount of like sound
song.
drops I'm gonna be doing.
Life
I have a lot of clips where like
mystery.
I'm gonna definitely clip Erik's. What was the question?
Jurassic Park. when I say like the life will happen, just like a T-Rex smoking weed, if I can throw that in there.
The fade in. He'll swoop in, swoop out on a swing.
That might
like a
be
wrecking
above
ball.
Sean's technical expertise, but it would be great if you could pull it off, Shawn.
Do
it.
The best I can do is probably turn us into babies. I think that's the other trend
Awesome.
I'm looking into
that.
now. So
I've seen that.
yeah, throw a baby
thanks,
Theo
Jen.
Vaughn in here and a baby Joe Rogan.
I like
Yeah.
This was
version
a lot of fun,
2.0.
and also we made it. But
it.
honestly, I think I feel like every time I talk to you, every time I listen to something that you're presenting, I learn something. So thank you for sharing certainly with Erik and myself, but also any listeners that we have that are probably, and I think our listener base, if I'm not mistaken, outside of parents and spouses, is folks that are living this. They're sort of in our bubble too, I assume. And the takeaway though is that same team, we're in the same sandbox. We should play in that sandbox together. We shouldn't retreat to our respective corners or original positions. Like if this was a negotiation, like we've all made our initial offers. Now let's start digging in and rolling up our sleeves and getting to whatever the final resolution is. But I really appreciate, I've been looking forward to this conversation around is 10 milligrams a low dose or not? And no, it's not. But I just think the conversation started there and just swelled into the landscape as we see it today. So Erik, any final thoughts from you before we tell everyone to like and subscribe?
Yeah, just thank you for coming on, Pam. And we'll have to do it again because as we had this conversation, I jotted down like a half dozen other questions that we didn't even get to yet. And I want to peel back the layers on like, let's actually start strategizing the three of us and how do we get to that next step and what models can we choose from the different states and all the action that they've taken. So we should plan another date in the future.
Session?
Yeah,
We'll
have a work session. We'll gavel it in.
Yeah.
We'll
Nice.
do Robert's rules.
I could probably get like a whiteboard, like fourth screen, and we can scribble some notes.
The Frankenstein of
but
how
I guess-
regulation the sausage is made.
I had a moment earlier when you were talking about sort of they don't want to see or they don't want to know like how, I'm like, they don't want to know how the sausage got made. Like I was thinking of like how to interject that at some point in our conversation. But to Erik's point, I wonder quickly if like, you've been so generous with your time and your information and your insights. What are three things that if I'm listening to this podcast, like, and I'm an operator, I might in any space, what can I do? What should I do? Who should I, like you mentioned, like trade groups, industry groups, and ASTM, et cetera. I think there's some tips in there that I just want to make sure we're definitely delivering to our listeners, which is, okay, now what? What should I do? Where do I go from here?
Where do you go from here? I think one of the biggest things I would recommend people do is look at same and similar non-cannabinoid industries and understand what their challenges are and how they operate, because you want to operate in their sphere and those relationships are really strong. Go to any opportunity that your regulators or your legislator gives for involvement, like show up, right? You want to be regulated, then show up. And lastly, join, right? Join any one of those things that we talked about, and if you can't afford it or your business is suffering, go to those organizations and say, I want to listen. I want to participate. How do I do that? I have limited resources. Everybody has limited resources, but everybody's voice is really important. Like some of the most unique insights I've gotten are just from talking to people about the challenges of their businesses. It'll make it more relatable. You'll understand that, everybody is feeling the same pains that you are. And so you'll be less willing, I think, to throw stones. Like, don't just get involved by LinkedIn. That echo chamber is dangerous. I think for mental health, which then means you need more cannabinoids, but like that's not getting involved. So I think that's my biggest takeaway.
But I liked the post. What do you mean I'm not involved?
It's just not the same level of discourse, and it's a lot of mudslinging that's there. I think a lot is lost in context. Show up physically. in those
Yeah.
conversations. It's not that you shouldn't do it. It's that I think it allows people to have that realistic wall removed and say things or be very off the cuff, which deteriorates relationships instead of building them.
Yep.
Make it
No,
more
I
human.
think that's true for a lot of scenarios too. I think a lot of social scenarios, like we all tend to be tough online, or like we actually put a face to a name, or you actually are face to face with somebody. Then, I think your dynamic changes, your perspective changes. So, we did it. So it was great to have you on. We were able to hit record, which was great. I guess until next time, like, subscribe, and we'll be back, Erik and I, with our next exciting guest.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.
The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.